Modern anime fans are spoiled. If you told someone 20 years ago that we would have the ability to watch almost every anime that comes out at virtually the same time as the Japanese release with professional, high-quality subtitles, they'd probably look at you like you were crazy. Being able to reliably watch every new anime that comes out has become so normalized that it's something that most of us take for granted. Many anime fans, myself included in fairness, have only ever known a world in which basically every anime we could ever want to watch is readily available on the internet, whether on legitimate platforms or via pirate sites. I am at least old enough to remember the setting sun of the fansub era. In a time before the internet and the widespread distribution of anime outside Japan, fansubbers were a vital part of the Western anime community. Nowadays, fansubbing is largely a thing of the past, as basically all anime is subtitled by professional groups. In most cases, the subs you find on pirate streaming or torrent sites are just rips of the Crunchyroll subs. But before the entire Western anime distribution machinery was consolidated into Funimation and Crunchyroll, I remember it was quite common, well into the 2010s, to rely on fansubs, especially to catch new episodes shortly after they aired in Japan. The professionalization and expanded accessibility of anime in the West has undeniably been a net positive for the non-Japanese anime fanbase. What was once a niche hobby, largely stereotyped as being for only weirdos, has become much more popular in mainstream. But my nostalgia for an era of fansubs, one that I was largely not around to experience, is reflective of my broader ambivalence towards how the anime manga fandom has evolved in recent years. I'm glad that it's easier than ever to watch anime, and that the ease of watching has catapulted anime from being a niche hobby into one that's becoming increasingly mainstream. But I can't help but feel like something was lost in the transition from a fan-driven, participatory model of anime distribution to a consolidated corporate distribution scheme. Back in the dinosaur times before digital fansubs and even DVDs, video consumption was done on physical VHS tapes or laserdiscs. Prior to the widespread adoption of the internet and peer-to-peer file sharing in the 2000s, options for watching anime were quite limited. You either had to settle for the small number of shows that became officially licensed and translated, or you had to scour comic shops, conventions, or if you were lucky, Japanese grocery stores and import stores for untranslated VHS tapes. If you were really savvy, or desperate, you'd find some expat living in Japan and have them send you a copy of a show recorded straight from Japanese TV. This was, of course, quite difficult, cumbersome, and expensive. It's for this reason that you start to see the first anime clubs crop up, particularly at schools and universities around the 1970s. Even if you managed to get your hands on some unreleased anime straight from Japan, you still had to contend with the language barrier. Japanese language classes and learning resources were quite uncommon at this point. If you were lucky enough to have someone around who was fluent enough to understand what was going on, you might have that person narrate the story while everyone else gathered around a tiny CRT TV and watched. Later on, people would type out or find translated scripts for the anime they were watching, which at least eliminated the need for someone to give you a play-by-play of whatever you were watching. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the technology had advanced enough that people started being able to jerry-rig setups with commercially available AV equipment to produce crude subtitles. The YouTuber The Smuggler has a fantastic video that goes into this process in much more detail than I can, but the gist of it was that you had to acquire an expensive piece of hardware called a genlock in order to synchronize the video signals from the Japanese laserdisc with the anime on it and your subtitles before recording it out to a VHS tape. This process was by no means intuitive, simple, or quick. For example, while modern video editing software allows you to easily jump between different parts of your video, this type of editing had to be done entirely sequentially, meaning that if you made a mistake, you had to start all over from the beginning. It's not a surprise then that a lot of these early fan subgroups tended to pop up around places like universities, where you'd be more likely to find groups of people with the technical know-how, and let's face it, the copious free time, to engage in the often quite cumbersome enterprise of fansubbing anime. Eventually, fansubbers would begin to organize around IRC, an early form of online instant messaging, or through email lists. If you were an anime fan at this time and you wanted to watch anime not distributed in America or watch episodes of a series beyond what was officially released, your only option was to acquire these fan-subbed VHS tapes from a fansub group or copy a tape from someone else who had a fan-subbed version. The issue was that every time a VHS tape is re-recorded, the quality degrades a little, eventually reaching the point where the subtitles became basically completely undecipherable. Producing these fan-subbed VHS tapes was also not cheap. Fansub groups had to expend effort to source the original material, pay for and maintain the AV equipment, and also to record and ship the actual tape. So in effect, you were often forking over nearly $20 to some guy you found on the internet for a VHS tape, only to play a veritable game of roulette on video and subtitle quality, praying that they actually came through and didn't just take your money and run, all for like 4 episodes of anime. Enter the anime club. While a largely quaint anachronism today, anime clubs were once a vital part of watching and sharing anime. Rather than pay for and acquire all of this anime yourself, it was a lot more efficient to get many people together and watch in a group, or to make copies and trade tapes amongst yourselves. Contrary to perceptions of anime fans as asocial nerds living in their mother's basements, being an anime fan at this time was an inherently social affair. The jank intrinsic in watching and producing anime fansubs naturally led to the formation of anime clubs at places like schools and universities, as well as in many major metropolitan areas. Towards the end of the 1990s, the era of VHS fansubs came to an abrupt end with the proliferation of DVDs, and later on peer-to-peer file transfers. No longer did you have to contend with the physical limitations of video degrading with re-recordings and having to mail people VHS tapes. Anime could now be sent to anyone, anywhere in the world through the magic of the internet. Furthermore, technology had advanced to the point where you didn't need to buy expensive and arcane hardware to fansub anime. The development of open source software like the Matryoshka video container format or the Aegisub subtitling software dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for fansub groups. By the late 2000s, the fansub aggregator Baka updates listed over 700 mostly English language fansub groups. My anime list had even more, with nearly 2,000 fansub groups of all languages. Now is probably a good time to address the elephant in the room regarding the legality of this whole fansubbing thing. Strictly speaking, distributing fansubs is a type of illegal piracy and a violation of copyright law, a fact that was usually not lost on these fansubbers. I don't really want to wade into the whole should you pirate anime debate, but rather I want to focus on an interesting aspect of the ethics that many fansub groups had. Most fansubbers were well aware of the fact that they were, in essence, illegally distributing the intellectual property of someone else. This is why, especially in the VHS era, fansubbing tended to revolve around certain ethical rules of thumb. While they generally did accept money in exchange for their VHS tapes, the goal was to charge as little as possible to just break even. The generally accepted practice was that you should only fansub works without an official international release, and if the work did get officially licensed, you should drop the fansub and buy the official product. To this day, this remains a fairly common practice among manga scanlation groups, who would drop projects once a work becomes officially licensed in English. In the digital era, these ethical rules became a little less relevant. This is because digital fansubs increasingly started to revolve around speed subbing, or the practice of trying to churn out subtitles for a new anime episode as fast as possible, and to be the first to shove them onto trackers for the cloud. Eventually, this evolved into straight up just ripping the subtitles from places like Crunchyroll and making them available on pirate and torrent websites. This leads us into an interesting history lesson about Crunchyroll as a platform and why it remains controversial with some veterans from the fansub era. In 2006, Crunchyroll got its start essentially stealing fansubs from other people and profiting off them. This was controversial, of course, because a generally accepted practice and goal of fansubbing was to fill gaps in distribution and to spread awareness of one's favorite anime franchise, not to generate profit. In 2007, Crunchyroll got a multi-million-dollar investment from the venture capital firm Venrock. but they continued to profit from illegal fansubs that had the permission of neither the original copyright holder nor the fansub groups until 2009, a fact that still rubs some people the wrong way. The guy who used to run Horrible Subs, which was this major repository of ripped Crunchyroll subs, basically said that he did it because he really disliked Crunchyroll as a company. The irony is that by the mid to late 2010s, Crunchyroll had become so prolific in licensing and subbing new anime releases that it essentially killed the entire fansubbing enterprise. Speed subbing, the last major rationale for fansubs, had no reason to exist now that professional teams released almost every new anime episode at the same time as the Japanese release. The site that came to prominence with the exploitation of other people's fansubs would eventually go on to render the enterprise it arose from completely moot. Digressions about legality and Crunchyroll aside, the robust history of fansubs is a prime example of what the media scholar Henry Jenkins refers to as participatory culture, or the idea that fans do not merely passively consume media, but also contribute or produce meaning through their active engagement with said media. The creation and distribution of fansubs is an inherently participatory and productive act, one that has dramatically shaped the trajectory of international anime manga fandom. In the pre-internet age, relatively few anime were brought outside of Japan for official distribution. Anime studios and licensors generally regarded, and still largely do to this day, international markets as a kind of exotic afterthought, rather than a serious demographic to make money from. Domestic Japanese sales of character goods, DVDs, and Blu-rays are still the primary way in which anime makes money. Because of this, the early Western anime distribution market would only localize shows that they believed would be reliably popular. This generally meant more mature anime like Akira or Cowboy Bebop, or shonen shows that would be reliably popular with young boys. By filling a gap in official distribution, fansubs were able to demonstrate the popularity of alternative genres like shoujo that were generally considered to not be financially lucrative in Western markets. For instance, Fushigi Yugi, a shoujo fantasy romance, was officially licensed in North America principally because of the popularity of the show among fansubbers. The importance of unofficial distribution would continue into the internet age, particularly with regards to the popularization of the slice of life or nichijouke genre. Slice of life as a genre is generally heavily rooted in Japanese cultural experiences, and so was seen as largely antithetical to the kinds of shows that were thought to resonate well with Western audiences. However, the explosive popularity of shows like The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya and Lucky Star, with both Japanese and international audiences online, propelled what was once considered a niche genre into the international forefront of anime consumption. While fansub groups and anime clubs have largely become relics of the past, perhaps their biggest legacy on the Western anime community was the development of the anime convention. Anime conventions originated as tiny events, often organized by local anime clubs. For instance, MomoCon, now one of the largest anime conventions in North America, originates from the Georgia Tech Anime Club. And if you go to any anime convention, you can see the lingering impact of the early VHS and DVD eras of anime. I always used to wonder why cons would have screening rooms that showed episodes of anime when I could just go watch that show on the internet whenever I want. But from the perspective of someone wanting to assess whether it's worth forking over like $60 or whatever to acquire 12 episodes of an anime, being able to preview what you're getting into seems awfully important. The dealer's hall, now largely a repository of overpriced collectibles I can get online for cheaper, or imported Chinese-made novelty items, were once an important venue to acquire, trade, and sell physical anime. I realize that this likely comes off as some cringe zoomer complaining about being born in the wrong generation. Obviously, the ability to watch and download anime whenever I want is preferable to having to fiddle with VHS tapes, but I can't help but feel like something has been lost in the sunsetting of fansubs and the wholesale professionalization and commercialization of the international anime distribution scheme. For one, fansubs are usually a labor of love by fans who wanted to make their favorite shows more accessible and widely available. Even in the VHS era, you started to see fansub groups dedicate significant effort into typesetting and making their subs look nice. The flip side to this is that because fansubbing was done by the sweatiest hardcore anime fans, there was no shortage of ego measuring and flame wars between fan subgroups over who had the most popular and high quality subs. On the subject of quality, though the quality of the actual subtitles varied a lot based on the Japanese proficiency of the group, at their best, fansubs would be a more faithful and meaningful localization compared to a professional group that's just trying to crank out a passable translation as quickly and cheaply as possible. This gets into a whole debate about translation and localization, but the reality is that Japanese to English translation is much more of an art than an exact science. Japanese has a lot of nuances and idiosyncrasies that just don't have any counterpart in English. So even minor differences in translations can majorly affect the meaning and nuances of certain scenes. Because of this, having translation and cultural notes be quite helpful in getting a better and more full understanding of the original source material. I understand that the excess reliance on translator notes and Japanese phrases basically became a meme towards the end of the fansub era, but there's something to be said for a group of dedicated fans trying to create the most faithful and meaningful subtitles they can. Compare this to Crunchyroll, who has a somewhat questionable track record of subtitles, the most egregious offender being their JoJo's Bizarre Adventure subs that rename a bunch of the stands for copyright reasons, even though you can very clearly hear the characters saying their real names in the show. Towards the end of the digital era, you started to see groups like Kami experiment with the typesetting for the shows they subbed. I know that Kami's subs and translation choices were a bit controversial, but you have to give them some credit for experimenting with and trying to do interesting things with their subtitles. Kami's subs single-handedly made certain shows way more entertaining than they had any real right to. Realistically, no one is nostalgic for the jank and difficulty of acquiring and watching anime. Rather, the importance of fansubs and fan distribution was reflective of the deeply community-driven nature of anime fandom of the time. As someone who spent most of my adolescence watching anime alone and talking about it with strangers on the internet, the idea that anime could be a social endeavor and that people once had to physically get together to watch and discuss anime was completely foreign to me. On a deeper level, my rosy view on an era of fansubs I was largely not around for is perhaps indicative of my ambivalence towards the increasing mainstreaming and commercialization of anime. On the one hand, I should be happy that anime is becoming more and more popular, and that watching anime won't automatically get my, very hypothetical, future kids bullied in school. On the other hand, so much of what made anime and being an anime fan unique was intrinsic to the niche, community-driven aspects of anime, factors that increasingly seem to have been lost as time goes on. Rationally, I know it's for the better that anime subs are now widely available on the same day as the Japanese broadcast from professional translation teams. But the death of the fansub is emblematic of greater change in anime viewership, from community-driven to corporate, from niche to increasingly mainstream. It's likely not my place to opine on this, as someone who was only barely around for the tail end of the digital fansub era, but something was undeniably lost with the death of the fansub.